tithing was for Israel only. God never gave a commandment to the Gentiles to tithe. I can remember back in 2006, I was working at a warehouse doing security, and I asked one of the workers, his personal view on tithing. I found out that this young man was a Christian, so I asked him this question. I said, do you believe in tithing? And he answered back angrily, I'm serious. He said, he had this frown look on his face, and he said, yes. It's found in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And he kept on going. See, it's found in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Well, if you have studied tithing like I have, starting back in 2005, and let me just share this. I'm not saying that every preacher that preaches tithing is a false prophet or false pastor, and he's on his way to hell. I'm not going that far. I taught the tithe life myself for 28 years or more, I guess. And I really believed it because it's in the Bible. Old Testament and the New Testament. And down through the years, because in 1970, the Lord began to speak to me regarding certain issues. And he began to correct me down through the years on quite a few things. Not everything. But it takes time to get a lot of traditions of men out of you. It does. So I'm not saying that when a preacher preaches the tithe lie that he's on his way to hell. I've never really said that. Because deceptions in many forms are found in the church. The traditions of men in many churches is strong. Not just the tithe line, many other traditions. Now, New Testament, tithing in the New Testament. What about the New Testament? We know God never did give the tithing law to the Hittites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and whatever. He only gave it to the Israelites. Let's move over to the New Testament. What about the New Testament? Actually, the same. God never gave tithing to the Romans, the Roman Christians, the Greek Christians, the Colossian Christians, the Corinthian Christians, the Christians of Asia, the Italian Christians, you name it. It was only, notice now, was past tense to the Jew. Because the word tithing as well as tenth is only found in 3 books in the New Testament. Matthew, Luke, and Hebrews. And in all 3 of these books, it's dealing with a Jew singular or Jews plural. Not one verse in these 3 books, Matthew, Luke, and Hebrews, that he's dealing with a Gentile. He's still dealing with Jews. Matthew 23, Jesus Christ was talking to the scribes and the Pharisees. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. He wasn't even talking to his disciples. Jesus was a Jew who was talking to the scribes who were Jews and the Pharisees who were Jews. You tithe meat coming in and anise, but you omit the weighty matters of the law. He wasn't talking to us. He was talking to Jews. And it's repeated in, I think it's repeated in Luke 11, I think. The same thing is repeated in Luke 11. He repeats it again. The same scenario. Now, when we go over to Luke 18, you have a situation. Jesus Christ is talking about two Jews who went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee that bragged about what he did. He bragged about how he fasted twice a week and he paid tithes of all that he possessed. Then another Jew who was a publican, which is another name for a tax collector, when he went to the temple to pray, his Bible says that he stood afar off and bowed his head and smote his chest and said, God be merciful unto me, a sinner. And Jesus told his disciples which one was justified before God. We know that. The man who came before God humbly. The Jew, the publican who came before God humbly. Not the bragging Pharisee. Now we go over to Hebrews. Now, this is interesting when you go to Hebrews, because when you look at the book of Hebrews, it's in the New Testament now. Oh, now in the Old Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was still the law. For anybody who's not aware of it, Jesus Christ had not died and rose, see. So the law was still in effect when Jesus Christ walked the earth. St. John chapter 1 says the law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. See, the law, Jesus Christ was born under the law, but yet he was grace walking the earth at that time. See, he was the transitional person. He was the one that was going to transition law into grace upon his death, burial, and resurrection. Now, going over to Hebrews. Now, when you look at the book of Hebrew, what do you think about? What do you think? New Testament, and it's to a portion of the church. It is, but it's not really written primarily to the Gentiles. It's written primarily to the Christian Jews. See, Hebrew. What is a Hebrew? A Hebrew is a Jew. Genesis 14 chapter talks about Abram, the Hebrew. Abraham was the father of the Hebrews. The Jewish nation came out of Abraham's grandson, Jacob. The 12 tribes of Israel, the nation of Israel, came out of Jacob. The nation of Israel came out of Jacob. See? Abraham, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, Hebrews really wasn't written primarily to the Gentiles. It was, but it was primarily written to the Hebrews, telling them that Jesus Christ had fulfilled the law. See, because in order to get a better understanding of this, read Acts 15 chapter. The Jewish Christians were combining the law with grace. So when you read Hebrews 7th chapter that talks about Abraham giving 10% of somebody else's property to Melchizedek, Abraham was a Hebrew who gave 10% to a man called Melchizedek, who also had to be a Hebrew. He wasn't a Gentile, people. He had to be a Hebrew. And in Hebrews 7:5, it clearly says, "Here men that die receive tithes," but there he received it there. Basically what it was talking about was when Abraham, who was the father of the Hebrew nation, gave 10% to Melchizedek, the Levite tribe who tithes was going to belong to, but yet had not been even born yet. In a sense, the Levites, who were still in the loins of Abraham, paid tithes to Melchizedek. It's actually best to read that in another translation. But it's not talking about that the Hebrew nation should still tithe. It was an historical narrative about what Abraham did. Now, let me try to look up and see when the book of Hebrews was written. Yes, it was written in AD 68, which means that the Jews were still sacrificing. They were still sacrificing bulls and goats. Because remember, when Jesus Christ died, the curtain in the temple split in two, indicating that Jewish sacrifice was no longer needed because the blood and bulls of goat only applied to Israel, not to anyone else. But when Jesus Christ died and went to heaven, with his blood, that covered all of mankind. The blood of bulls and goats, according to Hebrews, I think 9th and 10th chapter. Well, between Hebrews 8, 9, and 10 clearly say that the blood of bulls and goats is no longer significant. So Hebrews is a book dealing with the Jews, the Christian Jews, not the Christian Gentiles. So how can preachers tell us to do something that was only required by the nation of Israel? Because remember, Jews don't tithe today. They don't tithe today because they know they can't. The temple was destroyed in 70 AD. Hebrews is written in AD 68. They were taught the law for 400 years. It was hard for a Jew who was taught 400 years to accept some new concept, grace. For by grace are ye saved. But the scripture clearly says that if you justify yourself by the law, or you rely upon the law to justify yourself, you are fallen from grace. So tithing has nothing to do with the New Testament Christian. Tithing was past tense for the Jews only. God bless.